All right, hey everybody. I'm here on another Energise for Life interview. This time round, I'm interviewing Matthew Frazier, also known as No Meat Athlete. Now, Matthew is an absolute legend in the vegetarian world and the vegan world as well, and also now in the marathon and ultra marathon world. Matthew has been featured and mentioned and had accolades from people from the likes of Tim Ferriss to Zen Habits. He's been featured on WebMD and a whole heap of other sites. His Facebook page has got more likes than you've had hot dinners, and he's generally an all-round really great guy. So Matthew, delighted to have you on the call. Thanks so much for joining us. It's just, it's fantastic for us to be able to have the chance to speak to someone like you. There's so many people in the Energise community that are keen athletes or do want to start getting fit and do want to get running or go to the gym or whatever. And then there's also a bunch of people that are coming into the alkaline community who currently go to the gym or who currently run a lot and have a whole different set of questions specific to that. So it's really great for me to have access to an expert like yourself so that I can address all of these questions. And also I know that you've obviously got a heap of value of stuff that I have never even heard about. The other cool thing is that there are a bunch of people out there. A lot of people come into the Energise community through the Tony Robbins link, and a lot of people get interested in running in our community through the Stu Mittelman link, who you know is obviously a very keen ultramarathon runner as well. So there's definitely awareness of what you do. There's definitely awareness of who you are. I put up a little post on my Facebook fan page yesterday evening, and bear in mind it's just gone 7 a.m. for me here in Australia, so not that long ago, just saying that I was going to be interviewing you today and if people had any questions, and people just poured in with questions straight away. So there's definite desire in the Energise world there to hear from you. So I guess we just get started at the start. And where did you get started? How did you get running? Was it the vegetarianism that came first, or was it the running that came first?
It was actually the running that came first. I was in college and just lifting weights with some friends, and then we decided we wanted to lose some fat. So we said, okay, well let's run a marathon. That'll be the way, because marathoners aren't fat, so that'll cut the fat. So I mean that was a terrible idea at the time because we didn't know at all what we were doing.
Yep.
But I ended up running that marathon not very well at all, and it just totally got me hooked on running, and I realized that I had to qualify for the Boston Marathon, which would take a time of 3:10, and that was 3 hours 10 minutes, and that was an hour and 40 minutes faster than my marathon time. So that was kind of the beginning, and then it was just this long kind of journey to get there. And the vegetarianism thing didn't come till much, much later, and it actually didn't stick until I went to a Tony Robbins event, as you just mentioned.
Yep.
Because I had tried it before, and I had thought that I just had this feeling that it couldn't work, that you couldn't really do that with marathon training and make it work. But then it took this Tony Robbins thing to actually convince me that it was actually really healthy and could potentially be the thing that allowed me to qualify for Boston. It got me faster, and it ended up being exactly that. So I stuck with it, and felt better.
Wow! So you think that it was directly attributable to the nutrition that you shaved? How much off your marathon time?
I do, because I had taken a lot of the time off. I mean, the first hour and 10 minutes of that hour and 40 that I needed to shave off, that came just with time, with becoming a better runner.
Yeah.
But it was that last 10, 15 some minutes where I kind of just started to plateau a little bit, and didn't know what was going to, how I was going to do it. It just kind of, I don't know, beginning to get a little frustrated. So that's what kind of made me willing to just try some other stuff, try a different diet.
Yep.
And when I did my very next marathon, I took the last 10 minutes off and did it.
That's fantastic. It is absolutely fantastic. And, I think that the way diet and exercise feed off each other is so important in that as well. One contributes to the other getting better, which contributes to the other getting better.
Of course.
And how about in terms of how you felt before, during, and after on a vegetarian diet compared to a more standard diet?
The very first thing I noticed was more energy, and not always necessarily when I was running, but after I would eat dinner at night, and then instead of being totally full and just wanting to crash and go to sleep, I would just notice that I had all this energy, And I actually went through a period where I was doing a lot of runs at night, like 8 or 9 p.m. And I never would have done that before.
Yeah.
But with the actual running, what I felt was I just somehow felt I did lose a little bit of weight when I went vegetarian, and that was, I think, contributed somewhat to getting faster.
Yep.
But you just notice like a recovery difference. You can get out there and work out again the next day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or maybe 2 days later, really hard workouts. And that's something that pretty much every vegan athlete I've talked to has attributed the best recovery benefit to being vegan or vegetarian.
Yeah, and I haven't got a before and after comparison because I was vegetarian for a long time before I started running. But I would agree that I was surprised at how little recovery time I needed. Especially, after the first marathon, I thought I was going to be done for weeks. But I literally was able to get up and run the next day. There wasn't obviously I wasn't running elite sub 3 hours times, but still you would think, that after, running for a good 4 hours, you'd need a long recovery. And I since then learnt from talking to people like Stu that that is something that vegetarians don't experience so much as meat and traditional diet eating. So, and I have to apologise for looking cold and wrapping my hands around the tea. It is still pretty cold here in Melbourne, and still very early. So getting started, now that you're an accomplished marathon runner, and I know that you've run ultra marathons as well, you've obviously, in the same way that I've been doing the whole alkaline thing for a long time, I've had the experience of starting and overcoming hurdles and making life a lot easier for myself. And I imagine you've got the same thing with running. So have you got any good advice for people out there now who either used to run in the past and have sort of it's trailed off, as it often does with people, or that haven't ever really started running, they've never really gone running? How would you get started? What would be your best advice to people just starting off?
Well, the first thing that a lot of people do is they grow up thinking that you have to run fast. That running means running as fast as you can for a certain distance. So if you're running a mile or 2 miles, it means finishing that distance and being just exhausted.
Yeah.
And that's the first thing, is you don't have to go fast. I mean, go 2 or 3 minutes per mile slower than what you could do, and you'll start. I mean, that's how you kind of get to enjoy it. At least how I did.
Yeah.
But then there's a tremendous difference in the wear and tear that happens to your body when you train hard versus train easy.
Yeah.
So you can. I know you guys are focus a lot on the acid alkaline thing. That's another one. When you run slower, you don't produce nearly as much acid.
Yeah, definitely. And
you can feel better, recover faster, and it just doesn't tear you down the way that training fast does. So that's one thing. Is really just train easy. I mean, and then you can kind of work in these speed workouts where you'll go faster or you'll do hills, but you kind of do them in targeted times. It's not all you're running.
Yeah.
And in between those times, you have to go really easy, and easier than you even think is easy enough.
Yeah.
So for someone who's brand new, though, I would say definitely start with a lot of walking. Get out there and walk 5 minutes, and then run 30 seconds, and then gradually increase that amount as you start to feel strong.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can run for 10 minutes or 30 minutes or however long you want.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that people often, when you say slow down and run at a pace that's comfortable, there's a certain pride thing kicks in. That they feel a little bit stupid running so slowly, but you have to just get over it. And I know a lot of people that are going to be watching this are all keen Tony Robbins fans like you and I, and I would say that 99% of them have never done the out loud doing your incantation thing as you're walking along the street for the very same reason. But
yeah, that's still tough.
I have to say that I find that one a little bit difficult as well, the vast majority of the time. But I think it really is a critical point that you're making, that most people get put off running because the first run they go for, they think, maybe from yesteryear, or maybe they just assume you just have to run fast, and they're out of breath within 50 meters and wondering what on earth they're doing. When you just do, and what you said is just such good advice. Walk a bit and run a bit. Just intersperse your runs with walks. That's just such a classic example of simple ideas that are really powerful and make that big difference for people.
And there's even a popular Jeff Galloway is an former Olympian. He teaches a method of where people are breaking 3 hours in the marathon by still taking walk breaks, like every mile or so. Walking for it might be 10 or 15 seconds. But he's just a huge advocate of walking, even at that kind of speed.
Yeah. That's fantastic. And do you do anything with, like, do you use heart rate monitors during your training?
I've gone through periods where I've done that. Recently, I've kind of gotten into a more, sort of a holistic, kind of minimalist approach where you kind of can learn to sense when you're in those different zones just based on some physical cues. So I don't put on a heart rate monitor too much more when I run unless I really want to get the data for some reason.
Yeah.
But,
and what sort of physical cues would people look out for to say? Let's first talk about how would you know if you're going too fast and too hard.
Well, the really easiest one is when you're trying to do an easy run that's not supposed to be a dedicated speed workout or hill workout. You want to be able to carry on a conversation while you're running. So if you're running with a friend, you should be able to talk literally almost a normal conversation where it's like long paragraphs of speaking without problem. That's the first one.
Yep.
And when your mouth starts dropping open and you're breathing through your mouth a whole lot, that's another sign that you kind of cross this threshold into a point that's well beyond where we should be if you're running.
Yep. And do you want to be doing the sort of stomach breathing while you're running? Is that something that's important?
I haven't paid too much attention to breathing as far as the stomach goes. I've heard some experts about breathing in through your nose, some amount, and then out through your mouth, some other number of counts. I actually don't know too much about the stomach breathing or anything like that.
Yeah. Okay. So I think the key principle there is keeping it simple, isn't it? In terms of,
I mean, that's for me. That's what keeps me doing it long term. I can't stick to any kind of complicated workouts for the long term.
Yeah, but you mentioned just in there things like hill climbs and sprints and stuff. I guess there's two different levels of running we're talking here. There's one that's sort of semi-competitive or very competitive, and then there's the other one of just getting fit and getting active and being healthy. Would you recommend having some balance of speed and interval type training or hills and stuff, as well as just distance and steady pace stuff, generally speaking?
Yeah, I absolutely would. First of all, it will save you a tremendous amount of time if you're willing to, and if your body's able to handle running faster for, say, half an hour rather than going out and doing a 2-hour run. I mean, to me, those are kind of equivalent workouts. And I would, in general, prefer the one that takes only half an hour versus the one that takes 2 hours.
Yep.
So, I mean, there are great benefits for fitness and even for the recreational casual runner to doing hill workouts and speed workouts.
Yep.
And they don't have to be like break you down workouts. It's something that you're really tired for the half hour that you're doing it, and for maybe the hour after you feel kind of winded, but you feel really good.
Yep.
Those aren't something that I would say if you're a brand new runner. I wouldn't start doing that right away, because that is a pretty good way to get yourself hurt. Is just do too much before you're ready.
Yeah.
But after you've been running a little bit, maybe once you can run a 5K or a 10K, definitely start working that kind of stuff in.
Yep. And that's an important point that you bring in there about hurting yourself, because a lot of people don't do any form of warming up or warming down. I know I can occasionally be guilty on the warm up. I get outside, it's dark, it's early morning, and I just want to get running, which is probably the worst time to skip a warm up, is when it's dark and cold. What would you recommend in terms of warm ups and warm downs?
Well, I had a really interesting rule of thumb that I follow, and that's that the longer the run you're doing, the less you need to warm up. So if you're running a marathon or an ultramarathon, there's really not too much need to warm up, unless you're like an elite and you're going really fast right out of the gate. For the most part, at those speeds, your first few miles will serve as a warm up for you.
Yep.
However, for like something like a 5K or a 1 mile run where you're going at a pretty good pace, you definitely do need to warm up.
Yep.
And that's, again, something that Stu Middleman is really big on. And he says, again, it's the acid alkaline thing. He says that if you just jump right into a really hard workout, your body will go into this sugar burning mode where you do produce a lot of acid. Whereas if you gradually get into it by like walking for a few minutes, and actually I think Stu runs, he's a pretty accomplished runner. he says he even goes and runs a 13-minute or 12-minute mile for the first few miles of his run.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a whole run. So, I mean, that's a perfectly legitimate way to warm up for running, is just to run slow. I don't necessarily advocate like any kind of special stretches or jumping around or anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I think from everything I've read, particularly stuff that Stu has put out there and from interviews with him and everything else, that just moving slowly and easing in is the best warm-up, as opposed to going from cold to stretching cold muscles. He describes that as a very good way to pull and tear muscles.
It is. It definitely is.
But how about the warm down? What do you do for warm down?
Warm down is one that I am guilty of skimping on sometimes, because I get done a workout and then I'm ready to eat.
Yeah.
But really, same thing. I would, if I do, like, say, a 3 or 4 mile tough workout, it's always good just to do a cool down mile. That it can be walking fast. It could be a little bit of jogging in there. I don't think it matters too much exactly what you do. It's just a matter of keeping your heart rate, just letting it gradually go down. And if you are going to stretch, that's a much better time to do it, is once your muscles are warmed up.
Yeah, I think I'm going back a long time since I read Stu's book now, but I'm sure he said something like 10 or 20% of your run time just to spend keeping moving, whether that's walking fast or light jog. And I think that might sound intimidating when you first start running, because a light jog might be your jog. So feel free to just walk fast and slowly slow down your walk to warm down, I think. Okay. And just quickly, what about weights? Because there are a lot of people out there that do want to start running, but they don't want to skimp on their weight sessions as well. Do you do any form of resistance work?
Again, it kind of depends on what I'm training for. If I'm training for like a trail race where there's a lot of hills and just really much steeper hills than you might encounter on roads, I'll definitely hit the gym, do some just basic squats, and sometimes try to keep the weight down. This is how I actually got hurt when I was training for that very first marathon, and that was I was really into heavy lifting, like sets where you would do 2 and 3 reps or even a 1 rep max set, and I didn't respect the running and what that did to your body and the recovery time that required. So I just kept on lifting, kept on trying to squat.
Yeah.
You can definitely keep up lifting. There's nothing that makes those mutually exclusive or anything. It's just a matter of realizing that you do have to change your schedule around depending on when your runs are.
Yeah.
If you're just running easy every day or 3 days a week or something like that, you probably don't need to change too much. But if you're doing really long runs, like you're doing a 10-mile run, or you're doing any kind of speed work where your legs are really working and tearing down muscle fibers, I mean, you need to treat that as a workout day and allow yourself recovery from it.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think, and again, I think recovery message is worth reinforcing as being just as important as the workout itself. I remember that the first time I was doing marathon training, I was pretty obsessed with it at the time, and I was running every single day and running a lot, and I don't think my training was necessarily optimal, to be honest. I was just running a lot, keeping it within the heart rate. I'd read Stu's book, I was keeping my heart rates in, but I was doing just a lot of running. I wasn't doing any gym work at all. And I think that when I came to the race, the first thing is, when I came to the race, from a aerobic sense, from a lungs and heart rate, I could have just run forever. Literally, I could have when I kept within that heart rate zone, I could have just gone forever. But my body just couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
And the trouble is that I've found, and I'm not sure if it's something you've experienced as well, if you start to feel an ache somewhere, your brain starts to adjust your stride and your run to try and stop that pain, which then leads to an imbalance, which is a pain somewhere else. And then by the end of it, I was all over the place, over the line. But I think the message that I took from that was having some strength work or doing hill stuff and interval stuff and mixing up your workout would have been so much better for me. The other thing...
Yeah,
you go for it.
The thing I would say about that is that you make a great point that if something is not up to speed and it does start to fail, the rest of your body will try to compensate, and that can really lead to an injury because you're running in an unnatural way. So what you said, being strong is the way to do that, but particularly do exercises that are full body exercises or are kind of like core exercises that are designed to balance everything and designed to make your muscles work together.
Yep.
So do like functional lifting where you literally pick something up off the ground rather than the kind of old school bodybuilding where you'll isolate your bicep and just because no one in real life does any exercises that isolate muscle groups. Everything works together. It's functional.
Yeah.
So and like hill training, like you mentioned, that's something that's a natural movement. So all your muscles do work together when you do that. So I think those kind of exercises are much better than isolation.
Yeah, and I discovered your blog through reading Tim Ferriss's blog, who I'm a big fan of, and I know you've given all of his nutritional suggestions a work over. Is kettlebells something that you would recommend? I mean, you talk about functional lifting and the core strength.
Yeah, for that reason, it is. I haven't done much kettlebell lifting. I've only done a few workouts with kettlebells, but it does seem that the exercises that people do with those generally are the types that are functional lifting. Like, you pick them up or you swing them. I mean, those are natural movements that people have done for centuries, millions of years. So that kind of stuff I'm definitely on board with.
Because I'm definitely seeing kettlebells pop up in gyms a lot more lately, especially over here. And on the Biggest Loser, they had them all doing kettlebell swings. So I know a lot of people are probably seeing those emerge in their gym at the moment. So yeah, I think they're a great addition to a workout, and it's good to hear that that's something that will actively support a running regime as well.
Yeah,
I think the final point that I wanted to make on the workout stuff was your point about recovery time, because during that time when I was doing all that hard training, I did actually I think I didn't injure myself. I think I got ill, but it stopped me from training for a good 2 weeks solid. And I was distressed, to say the least, because, I was coming into the last month of preparation, and it was my first big, run, and I was just stepping up my Ks and getting ready to go, and I was just wiped out for 2 weeks. But what I found is after that 2 weeks, my first few runs after that time were so much faster and stronger than before, because I'd had a forced recovery time. I think, there's a temptation when you start getting hooked on exercise, particularly running, which it is easy to get hooked on, no matter how much people listening to this and watching this might think that isn't possible. It is. And you burn out, man. If you're not giving your body a chance to recover, you're not giving it a chance to respond to the increased demands you're putting on it and get quicker and faster and stronger. I hadn't thought of that, and I'm glad you raised that point, because I think that's probably one of the more important points about training is just forcing yourself to have that recovery. And
that's something if I design a marathon training program, especially for beginners, I almost always try to make it so that the long run doesn't increase 2 weeks in a row. Just so that every other week you have kind of a little bit of a relaxed week and then a harder week, and it kind of goes 2 steps forward, 1 back.
Yep.
And I'll always every 4 or 5 weeks throw in a week that really is a significant reduction in your training, just so that your body can recover. And you can do other things during that week, but just not quite as intense and with different muscles.
Yeah, cool. That's interesting to hear it that structured. I'd never thought, but that's a fantastic idea. So getting into the part where I've had the bulk of the questions fired at me from people out in our community, they want to know about diet. Now, I know that you, obviously, through Tony Robbins and people like Stu, are aware of the whole acid-alkaline approach, but I really want you to not moderate anything you're saying now. So don't presume it's got nothing to do with it, because I want to hear specifically exactly what you do. And I'm going to hit the biggest question head on, because it's the one everyone asks me, and I'm sure it's one they ask you as well when you say you're vegetarian, and that's the protein issue.
Yep.
Sure. This is an issue for people who are just starting out. That's a question that comes up. But it's as much a big issue for people, like I said, coming from a place where they're already doing a lot of exercise, they're working out at the gym, or they've got a really active job, and they're worried that switching to a vegetarian or an alkaline diet, where do I get my protein from? Right. How do you manage that?
First thing I would say is you should question the assumption that you need this huge amount of protein. I don't want to speculate about what the reasons are why people push higher amounts. There are all different explanations for what that might be. But I personally don't think you need 25 or 20% or whatever, even more than that sometimes if you diet from protein. I get by on 10 to 15%, and it's not something that I have to keep. I don't keep any kind of like numbers or keep any kind of food journal that guarantees that I get that every day.
Yep.
My strategy is just if you were trying to get 30% of your diet from protein, you would have trouble as a vegetarian. Like I can admit that, unless you're willing to take a lot of supplements or just eat food that really doesn't resemble like any kind of good meals.
Yeah.
So you have to accept you can't get or shouldn't try to get 30, 40, whatever huge numbers of protein. But for 10, 15%, you can get it. What I do is just with every meal and snack, and I might eat 5 times in a day, make sure there's some source of protein in there. Something that I consider to be a decent source of protein, which a lot of times is beans. Nuts are another good one. The soy products, I'm not a fan of having soy like every day or even probably every week, but that's one that if I am feeling that I'm lacking protein or just kind of feel like I want something just that has a lot of protein, then I'll eat a tempeh or tofu type thing and do that once a week.
Yep.
So that's an option. And then, whole grains have much more protein than people realize. If you're getting away from refined grains, like spelt versus white, refined wheat has a significant amount of protein that is pretty close to the percentage that I'd want in my diet anyway.
Yep.
So it's not that big an issue as a lot of people tend to think it is.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Beans, that's something that actually Tim Ferriss opened my eyes to, is how useful beans can be and pulses can be in that whole equation. And I agree. From an alkaline perspective, I question the high percentage of protein in certain exercise-based diets. But I do believe that if you're working out hard, you would need more than someone who isn't working out hard. But I think it is possible to get it pretty easily, like you say. Just the inclusion of certain smart foods. What would be a typical breakfast or morning type routine for you firstly on a normal day and then on a race day?
Okay. So my normal breakfast is every single day I have a smoothie that is pretty much entirely raw. It has hemp protein as the protein source in it, along with some other vegetable proteins that soy is not included in that mix. It's kind of a mixed veggie protein blend. And then I'll throw some almond butter in there and some greens or some chlorella, some fruit, ice, water, and then just kind of whatever my superfood kick that I'm on, I'll throw that in there too.
Yeah.
And then I'll usually follow that up an hour later or so with a bagel, which, people argue about whether a bagel is a good health food or not. I eat a whole wheat bagel. It does provide, 10, 12 grams of protein or something. Mm-hmm. And I put almond butter on it, which is just raw homemade almond butter.
Yep.
So it's kind of like a vehicle to get that almond butter in me, really more than anything else, along with contributing some extra calories. And I can always, I think I can always use more complex carbohydrates just in my diet just because I run so much. But then that kind of brings me to what your next question was, what about a race day morning?
Yeah.
And that's when I wouldn't actually try to eat the starchy stuff like the whole wheat bagel.
Yep.
I usually would, if I'm going to eat that on a race morning, it would be 4 or more hours before the race. If I get up that early, then I'll eat something that starchy. Mm-hmm. In general, I'll try to just eat softer things like banana, maybe even agave nectar, which has kind of come under fire recently as being high fructose corn syrup. But as a workout fuel, I think it's a pretty good one, and you're going to be using it immediately later. That I don't have any problem with it. So I'll eat the starchier stuff 3-4 hours before a race, and then as it gets closer, start to shift just to the much softer things, or even liquid form, like smoothie or homemade sports drink type thing.
Yep. And I think that's a good point you make there, that some of those choices in there are based on the fact that you're running a long way a lot of the time. So, for instance, and this is another Tim Ferriss favourite, but the almond butter on a celery stick, for instance, if someone isn't going to be running many multiples of kilometres during the day, then that is a perfectly good carrier of almond butter. I'd love to hear, what's your almond butter recipe, roughly?
Basically, I have like a Blendec blender, which is like the opposite the counterpart to Vitamix. I don't know if you guys have these here in Australia, but those are the two high-powered blenders that are here.
Yep.
So I just throw like 3 cups of raw almonds in there, and if the blender's having trouble, I'll put a little almond oil in there.
Yep.
And then some coarse sea salt, and sometimes a little bit of maple syrup, but not always, depending on the day.
Yep. Easy.
Yeah,
and that's the thing I love too, because a lot of people when they first start out just gloss over things like making your own almond butter, making your own almond milk, and those types of things. And it's nice to hear other people saying it's that easy as well, because it really is that easy, and it does keep reasonably well. You don't have to necessarily just use it all at once.
And it saves a lot of money too, because that almond butter costs $15 a pound here. I can make it for less than half of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, what's your relationship with the whole carbs versus fats thing as a fuel, as a running fuel? Do you do the sort of traditional carb loading? I mean, I know you said you try to make it softer stuff. You'd eat carbs 4 hours before a meal, but where's your head at with regards to your nutritional requirements during a race?
Okay, so I eat many fewer carbohydrates, especially sugary carbohydrates, than most runners do. That's partly because I do longer distance races.
Yep.
So for a marathon, or especially for an ultramarathon, to me, the need to get those really quick sugars into your body is not there the same at all.
Yeah.
For a marathon, if you're running a marathon in around 3 hours, then I think there is some benefit to having some sugars in you. But once you get much beyond that, and if you're reasonably fit and you're not necessarily running in a sugar burning mode all the time, you can get by on fats and without putting in all that processed sugar, or even like fruit sugar, which will act the same way as far as sugar burning goes.
Mm-hmm.
So what I like to tell people, that if you can get to the fat burning thing, it's something worth doing, but it takes some work to get there. I mean, you shouldn't just jump in and say, I'm going to go for 15-mile run today, and I'm just not going to bring my Gatorade or my gels or whatever.
Yeah.
Because if you do that, you'll get into serious trouble. I mean, your body's, if it's used to burning sugars, then it's going to keep doing that, and you can't just switch to fat without working yourself into it.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. The next biggest nutrition-based question that people always ask, and that people are wanting me to ask you specifically, is they're worried about losing too much weight. They're worried that if they stop eating admittedly fatty, bad foods, and couple that with starting to run every day or 3 times a week or every other day, that they're going to just lose too much weight. I mean, I have a nutritional understanding of how and why and what can be done about that. But from your perspective, is that an issue that you've faced, or is it something that you've seen happen in other people? And what do you recommend for people that have got that concern?
Okay, well, just from my own experience, I lost about 5, maybe 7 pounds within the first month or 2 after I went vegetarian. And I started to worry, I was like, man, that's a lot of weight to lose. I hope it doesn't keep up. But then it actually just leveled off right there, and I've been at that same weight for 2.5 years now since then. So it hasn't been a long-term issue for me. One reason is because when you cut out that fatty food, you are, like, fast food or just total junk. I mean, you're cutting out a lot of calories. You're not cutting out a lot of nutrients.
Yeah.
So when you're replacing 2,000 calories that were junk with now 500 calories that are really dense, and what Brendan Frazier, a good vegan triathlete, he calls them high net gain.
Yeah.
Meaning you get, for not a lot of calories, you get a whole lot of nutrients. I mean, if you do that and you start getting more nutrients, even though it's less calories, it will give you what you need, and you may not lose weight from that.
Yeah.
As far as running goes, you have to increase your calories. If you're going to be burning an extra 1,000 calories or whatever, 500, 700 a day, you need to replace that, because otherwise you will lose weight. If you're losing calories and you have a deficit, then you will lose weight. So you need to replace those. And that's why I like those foods like almond butter that actually do offer a lot in a small amount.
Yeah. And I think it's the same as well with the pulses and the beans and things. They offer you a good source of getting calories back in with nutritional value and without junk along with it as well.
Yeah.
Any other quick food tips for post workout? If people, you know, because weight loss is the goal for a lot of people, but if weight loss isn't your goal, any quick meals?
Right. I mean, even if weight loss is your goal, I would say the number one key for post workout is get something in your body like within a half hour of the end of that workout.
Yeah.
Because that's the window where your muscles are just craving nutrition. And if you miss that window, it's been shown time and time again that there is significant reduction in your recovery and the ability to recover if you don't get the process started right within that. And some people say it's half hour, some will say it's 45 minutes, but everyone agrees you got to get something in there right away.
Yeah.
And that meal should generally be high carbohydrate, lower protein, and you don't really need too much fat at that point. So generally they say 4-to-1 ratio of carbohydrate to protein. Yep. Most of the time, if you just focus on getting carbohydrates, the protein in that small amount will generally tend to take care of itself, I've found.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then an hour or two later, then eat a higher protein meal that's maybe like a meal time for you, more like a traditional meal that you eat.
Yep. Yep. And what sorts of foods, what else forms up part of your diet? So what sorts of lunches and dinners, generally speaking, what types of things do you find yourself cooking with more often than not?
Okay, well, we've mentioned beans a lot of times. One of my favorite meals is just to take a bean and some sort of grain, like often rice, sometimes quinoa, or brown rice if it's rice.
Yep.
And then a green, like could be collard greens, could be kale, and just it's very easy to prepare those three things and make it taste good with a variety of different things you can try.
Yep.
But you can do that, and that's a great way to just get. People talk about this complete protein idea of beans and rice, beans and grains. It's not necessary that you need it in a single meal, like complete protein, but it's a good way when you're getting those different sources throughout the day. Even if not at the same meal, you do complete your protein. That's a good thing to do.
Yeah.
So beans are a big one. A lot of grains. I know some people are kind of anti-grain these days. I'm not anti-grain. I do try to reduce the amount of whole wheat I eat, because at least in the United States, and I'd imagine in Australia, it's really easy to eat whole wheat in every single meal if you're not paying attention. Yep. So I make a conscious effort not to eat that at every meal, and maybe just have that once a day or once every 2 days, and focus on other grains and seeds sometimes instead of that.
Yep. And I'm glad you mentioned quinoa, which is just such a fantastic thing that has been. I'm so glad for the day I discovered quinoa, which is apparently it's actually a grass, so it doesn't even strictly fall into the grain category.
Right, I knew it wasn't a grain. I thought maybe it was a seed or something. I think maybe it's the seed of a grass. I don't know. Yeah, and that's the other thing for the people in the alkaline thing, and you probably heard it through Tony Robbins as well. Having sprouted grains. Absolutely gives you all of the benefits of grains multiplied, but none of the negative consequences as well. It's extremely easy on the digestion, and I can't recommend sprouts highly enough. And that's another one of those things that people, when they first start, and I remember when I first got back from Tony Robbins thing, just going, I don't know about that sprouting stuff. That sounds too hard. I'm probably just going to gloss over that and do the other stuff instead. But it is so super easy to do. And once you get into a routine of it, it's so worthwhile. And again, saves you a bunch of money. I mean, I know from last time I was in England, which was a few years ago, I don't recall too many supermarkets selling like sprouted alfalfa and mung beans and stuff, but they do here in Australia, and they cost a fortune, and they go off within like a day. I think they have like diseases on them sometimes. They carry disease easily.
Totally. You really have to have them fresh, and growing them is really easy. So definitely recommend that. The last big question really that I have is about time management. I know step one for people is just get moving, and I'm looking at I can see my hairs all over the place. I've been up since about 3:30 this morning on a webinar with another guy for some people in our alkaline-diet community, and we were talking about exercise as part of that, and the first step to be just to get moving. Literally, if you're not exercising at all now, just start walking, even if it's just for 15 minutes. Just getting moving. So there's that kind of phase. That's obviously not a big time management issue, but the more you get running and the more you get interested in running, and especially if you then want to start getting into even semi-competitive runs, time management becomes an issue. When you're training for a marathon and you're running significant amounts of time, in a traditional sense, people would just train for a marathon by running a lot. I've heard recently lots of more interval-based training type programs or different way. I mean, how do you approach the time issue? Do you literally just run a lot?
No, I actually don't run that much. Not nearly as much as you would think for say an ultra marathon or even a marathon.
And
like
just
earlier, I don't
for
want, if I can. Oh,
sorry, just for clarity for everyone there, how long is an ultra marathon, so people can understand truly how ridiculous an achievement it is that you run those things.
Yeah. Well, if you run a 50K, which is just a little bit longer than a marathon, that technically counts as an ultra marathon. A lot of people consider ultra marathons to be 50 miles or more. So those are the distance that I've done. It's the 2 50-mile races. But that's not even. People do 100-mile races and 150-mile races and much more. So there's still ways to go from even where I am.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's a good example. To run a 50-mile race, you don't run 50 miles in your training ever at any time. You don't run 40 miles in your training. Some people don't even run a 30-mile run in their training for an ultra marathon. So you certainly do want to put in some long, slow distance. I mean, some people now are getting around that and avoiding it, but traditionally you still have to, I think, put in some sort of distance that at least half or 2/3 of the distance that you're going to be trying to run in your race.
Yeah.
But you don't need to do it that many times. And like I said earlier, if I can avoid running 2 hours and do a half-hour workout that's harder, I'll do that instead. So I might try to do my long run only once every 2 weeks instead of once every single week, like a lot of people do. And then, do 4 or 5 harder workouts that take between half hour and 45 minutes between them. So you don't even need to run every day. A lot of people question how effective it really is to run these, what people call these junk miles, that are not done for any specific purpose. So, I mean, like, a lot of people will run in this area that's between a hard workout and between this easy zone that we talked about earlier. And it's questionable whether that really does too much. If you do that every single day, you're not going to get nearly the benefit of someone who does probably half the volume of training you do, but does a nice mix of really fast and really slow.
Yep.
Another thing is that if you're going to get that into running, then you start to look at it as a hobby, and it becomes something that you are happy to do and spend 2 hours on a Saturday during a nice run. It becomes something that you really do appreciate. And you can do other stuff. You can listen to music. I actually listen to a lot of books on tape, including Tony Robbins, one of my favorite workout things. So, the time doesn't seem like that big a time issue. And the final thing I'll say about that is that if you are coming from that place where you're not doing any exercise or very little, when you actually do get yourself moving, it's amazing how much time you all of a sudden have. Yeah. And like I mentioned before, after I went vegetarian, all of a sudden I had an extra hour or two at the end of the night that I would use to just want to crash in front of the TV.
Yeah.
And, then it turned into, that became productive time for me.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I'm so glad that you've raised that, because it's so true. When you start to get healthy and energetic, you wake up earlier and you go to sleep later naturally. So
right.
You've got more than enough time.
I'm watching TV, I mean, do more.
Yeah, totally. Okay, well, look, that's all the questions that I had for you. You've covered everything absolutely perfectly. I know that there are going to be people that want to know more, and I know that you've got some really cool resources coming out in the next 2 weeks or so, I think. What sort of stuff can people find from your site? And obviously, I'll send everyone who's been listening a link out to get to that information. What sort of stuff are you going to be putting out?
Okay, well, I mean, just in general on my site, there's a page where you can find a lot of vegetarian recipes. Almost all of them now are vegan recipes, and they're the kind of recipes that are substantial. They're meant for athletes, people who are doing activity, not just some sort of salad, stuff like that.
Yep.
And of course, the resources about training and what to eat before and after workouts and how much and the guidelines. But over the next week, I'm going to be putting out a bunch of content that's specifically aimed at people who have not yet run a half marathon, or maybe have run a half marathon but haven't done it on a vegetarian, vegan diet. So I'm going to be putting out a bunch of stuff. The first thing is going to be a little thing about the common mistakes that people make when they do increase their distance from say, a 5K distance up to a half marathon, because they really are very different distances, and there are a lot of mistakes that it just seems that the first time you do it, it's just so easy to fall into these different traps. So I'm going to be releasing a report about just a bunch of these common mistakes, many of which I made in my day, multiple times even before I learned lessons. And then after that, I've got a video coming out about kind of the psychological stuff and the goal setting and the focusing. And a lot of that's kind of drawing on this thing when I qualified for the Boston Marathon, when I took this hour and 40 minutes off my first marathon time. A lot of people just seem to think that's I guess they don't understand how you can take that much time off the marathon. So it's kind of what goes into achieving something that's that far away from where you are at one moment, which for many people a half marathon is going to be if they are a new runner or maybe have just run a 5K. So I've got that, and then I got a little bit more stuff too in the next week.
Fantastic. And that I am thinking and presuming that all that stuff's going to be relevant, and people are going to learn stuff from that, even if they're really just a beginner. If they're just starting out, there's still going to be a heap of great stuff in there for them too. So definitely going to be letting everybody know about that content, and I'm going to be expecting that I still make quite a lot of the mistakes that you were talking about in there as well. So I'm definitely going to be checking that out. Now, I'm going to be seeing you in Scottsdale in a few months, I think. So we'll have to head out for a run in the beautiful Arizona desert.
That would be nice.
But man, thanks so much for your time. It's been a fantastic interview. You've answered every question just exactly perfectly, and I'm pretty sure that everyone out there in the Energise community is going to be really pumped to get hold of some of your information and head over to your site. And of course, the link to your site is going to be all over this video and all over the screen here. And guys, there's going to be comments as well below here, so definitely leave comments below the video. Ask questions. I'll answer every question that I can. If there's questions for Matt, I'll send those on for him and hopefully get him to answer those too. Hit the Facebook like button, jump onto Facebook No Meat Athlete and Facebook Energise for Life. Come and join us there. We've both got heaps of cool stuff going on there as well. And until the next time, see you later, everybody. Thanks again, Matt. And we'll be in touch soon.